Thanks everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm an addict. Um, Hi. I just want to start by expressing some gratitude. What an amazing thing to be part of, and how cool that we can all kind of hang out. Technology is amazing. I'm really grateful to be part of this. I'm grateful that I can sit here and do this morning, even though it's a little bit early over in the UK, but it's okay. I have coffee and I have God, so I should be fine. Um, I guess just a quick disclaimer, if you like. All that I have to share with you today is my own experience, my own story, and my own journey. I'm not speaking for anyone. This is entirely my own stuff. And I'm hoping that someone can kind of grab some sort of identification with something I shared today. That's the plan. Yeah, I'm just going to try and authentically and honestly share my truth. And I'll start from the beginning. I was born in the northeast coast of Scotland in a little town called Aberdeen. Um, I tend to talk about my childhood more because it was extremely normal. It was very loving. My parents are the most wonderful people, and they worked extremely hard to provide for me. I had a really, really big family, tight knit unit. We all used to go to my grandparents on a Tuesday and have fish and chips, and it was just really lovely. I was surrounded by love and external security, and I was never shouted at. I was never scolded. My parents, I never drank. I never saw them drinking or using or even smoking cigarettes. So I had quite this idyllic upbringing, sort of, you can even write it, especially for the first sort of 9 years of my life. And despite all that sort of external comfort, my earliest memories are ones of fear. It kind of underpinned my entire existence, and I just really struggled to feel comfortable. And I thought that's just how everyone was. I really struggled with going to school. I feel like I didn't feel like I fitted in. I hear that said a lot, but I honestly felt like I was walking a different planet to the rest of you. Um, Everything terrified me. I was scared of connecting with other kids. I didn't like going to like parties, or I didn't like gym class. I didn't like lunchtime. I didn't like anything. I was the most comfortable I could be when I was just at home with my parents or just playing on my own. I'm an only child, so I was kind of like extremely inward. Um, and I had this really loud head, this head that always told me that I wasn't good enough, that I was going to do something wrong. I was so terrified of being wrong. And I was just really, really frightened. I'm extremely shy. I couldn't really connect to anyone outside of sort of my home. Um, and that's how I remember childhood, even though it was lovely and we had lovely memories and we all went to a caravan at the weekend and everything was like on paper really great. Um, and that sort of discomfort and dis-ease is very apparent. A lot of the stuff that I say is in hindsight, and at that point I can sort of tell that something was a bit off key. Like my perception of the world was definitely skewed, and I carried that discomfort through schooling into secondary school, where things just got a little bit more difficult, just because my existence was difficult. Again, nothing really that traumatic was happening. I mean, my parents split when I was 9, and I went to live with my dad. Um, and he was great, and we had a really good time, and my mum was still around, and nothing that awful was happening. But I was just really struggling to be who I was and to be comfortable and to fit in. And at school, I would sort of chameleon into the different groups. Like I was really studious, so I wanted to be kind of like nerdy and hang out with like the science geeks. But also I wanted to be like the cool kid who was smoking around the back of the bike sheds. And it was just a front that I was putting up this whole time, and it was quite a difficult thing to maintain. Um, and it was all consuming, that fear and that anxiety and that knot in my stomach and the not feeling good enough. It was just how I felt all the time, and I found a solution to that problem fairly young. And for me, it initially came in the form of alcohol. And I don't remember the first time I had a drink. I don't remember the first time that I thought about it. I remember being caught at school having a cigarette round the back by my guidance teacher, and she kind of tutted at me, and I did the whole thing like, well, if you had my life, you would smoke cigarettes too, and that was just bizarre because there was nothing really obviously going wrong. Um, but I found alcohol and it sort of did for me what I couldn't do for myself at that point, and that was just to be, just to get present and to relax into myself and to like communicate with other people easily and have a little bit of fun. And I liked that. It really released that knot in my stomach and it kind of made me just feel like part of something. And that's how my early drinking was. I was just doing what everyone else my age was doing. We were really young and there was a huge drinking culture over here in the UK, and it's a binging culture. So what we did was get our older siblings or our friends' older siblings to go out and buy us like cheap cider or just vodka, and we would drink it in the park to get silly. And we drank to get drunk, and it was all right. It was quite fun, I suppose. And there were very little consequences. Maybe a slap on the wrist when I got home, but nothing too extreme. Like I said, everyone else was doing it, so I thought it was okay. And it was okay. I got away with it for a while. And it started to be, as I got a little bit older, I've always looked a bit older than I am, although I like to think it's maybe slowing down, but I've always looked a little bit older than I was, so we kind of got into bars and stuff at like age 15, 16, we could go out. So we would do that on school nights and just get ridiculously drunk and go home and just go into school the next day hungover. And it never really became an issue. I used to kind of skip class, but I could do that because I would study obsessively in my spare time. I had this this obsession, sort of obsessive compulsive behaviour came out in other ways. And I would study for hours after school every day. And one thing I was thinking of last night actually is when I used to study, my head was so loud that in order to concentrate, I'd have to have like the TV on and the radio on at the same time, just to kind of like drown out the incessant chat that was going on in my head so that I could focus. And that's insane to me now because I just like to sit in quiet and peace. And that was just not something I could ever achieve. So yeah, I still managed to do pretty well at school despite the fact I was kind of going out and getting silly. And I went on to study at Aberdeen University, and that was sort of when I realised deep down in me, I sort of looked at my peers and I thought, okay, there's something slightly off key with me here, but it's okay. I'm just gonna ride it out and see how long I'll get away with it. And it wasn't really the typical noticing of things going wrong, because where my peers were sort of going out and celebrating the fact they had this newfound freedom and they'd moved away from home, and a lot of them were in a different city. They were going out and partying a lot and being mess heads and experimenting and just rolling into uni the next day absolutely dying. And that's not what I did. I very early on went inwards. Again, I was at my happiest when I was just at home on my own, with something to take the edge off of what wasn't even a hard day, but it was just difficult to exist. So we would study in 24-hour computer lab buildings until stupid o'clock in the morning because we wanted to all do well. And I would be like clock watching to make sure that I was going to get to the shop in time so that I would have enough drink at home just to be comfortable that evening. And my thinking was already really skewed around like my need and my necessity to numb out from the day. And I sort of jumped at every chance to like go to the pub, and I didn't really like socializing, but if I could have a drink or something, then I would be okay. So in between classes we would do that, and then I remember once even one of my lecturers gave me some extra lessons in I think it was maths I was struggling with. And I rocked up to his office with like a crate of beers, just like, yeah, this is what we do here, right? Thinking that was normal. And the way I justified it to myself was just that, you know, I'd seen my dad have a drink of an evening and that I was just sort of being a grown up. But it wasn't. It was very slowly starting to consume my thinking, my experiences, my world, the way I was feeling physically. I started, at 17, 18, I was already a daily drinker. I woke up in the morning with like a rattle at 17, 18, and I had to sort of often take the edge off of it. And I remember going to the doctor when I was about 17 and just kind of trying to explain how I felt. Like I just didn't feel comfortable in myself. I was really anxious all the time, and in the sort of 8-minute slot that I had with my GP, they had diagnosed me with mild depression and anxiety. And I was like, okay, well, at least I've got sort of an answer to why I feel so rubbish. And I was just prescribed pills, and I told my dad, and he was very like, oh, everyone's got a little bit of depression. And I was just like, this can't be it. This can't be what's really wrong with me. But I always felt like at the end of the day, when I got to that glass or 7 of wine, that I was feeling better. So I was self-medicating at a very young age. And it started to have impact on me. My mum actually, probably about when I was about 18, 19, she came over to visit. She lives in North Carolina, and she came over to the UK to visit and stay with my partner and I. And she grew up with like alcoholic parents, and she grew up in the destruction and the carnage of what active addiction looks like. It was violent, and it was abusive and stressful. And she started to see signs in me at that age where she was like, you've got a problem. And I was like, how dare you? How very dare you say that of me? And I just had this sort of really shitty attitude towards her. And I didn't want to hear it, because I think somewhere I knew in me that it was going to take over at some point. But I just wanted to turn away from it and not really address it until I absolutely had to. And I had my first experience of a 12-step fellowship when I was about 20, I think. My mum was again over visiting, and she was going to an Al-Anon meeting, and there was another meeting next door, and she suggested that I come along with her. So I had quite a few drinks and then went to this meeting. And at that point, I was too young and I was not ready, and all I saw was just people talking about their problems, and never heard a solution because I wasn't open to it. I wasn't hurting enough yet. So I sort of, the seed was planted, I suppose, but I was just very, very ignorant. I didn't really want anything to do with it. So I left that meeting and went to the pub to celebrate the fact that I was going to look at my problem. And that's bizarre to me now, but yeah, so I got on with university. I somehow graduated, even after turning up to exams off my nut. I somehow managed to get a degree, and then I went out into the world of work, where things started to get a little bit ropey, because I had all this responsibility now. I had to be a grown-up, and I didn't like that idea of getting up and going and working all day. And it was a struggle for me. I again just had that anxiety, that fear, and it was getting more intense as I was sort of descending into the illness, I suppose. And at that first sort of big girls' office job that I had, the directors took me out for a drink on a Friday. It was sort of like an initiation thing. And I was like, oh, I got an email saying like pub at 12, and I was like, well, this is great. I'm gonna be fine here. And I went to the pub with all the big boys at work, and they had like a couple of pints of beer, and I had about 8 wines, and went back to work trying to function like that. And for me, that Friday lunchtime, which is a one-off thing, became every day for me. I'm about 21 years old, and I'm waking up in the morning with that just like sense of impending doom, and just riddled with fear. So I would clock watch until lunchtime, and I actually used to do this thing where I would draw a circle for each hour I had at work and colour it in by 15-minute blocks, so that I was so obsessed with clock watching and the preoccupation with how I was going to get my next one that I would colour in little circles to show how much time I had left. And it would get to lunchtime, and I would dart off to this old man's pub around the corner, and I'd go right to the back. And everyone else is going out and getting like a sandwich or going to the gym, and I'm in the back of a pub, like just necking as many drinks as I could, and then trying to cover it with like chewing gum or whatever, and then going back to work. And it was just like giving me enough ease and comfort to get through the rest of my day. And at this point, I'm like, I know that that's not normal, but I'm going with it anyway because I seem to not really have much other choice. I can't function well without it. And leaving work would be walking home and initially sort of like going into all the pubs on the way home, and then eventually it became just like going into the corner shop, buying a bottle of something, and then buying a bottle of like soft drink, emptying it out, transferring it over, and then walking home just looking like I was a normal person, which I wasn't. And it slowly started to grab me like that, these little things that I kept justifying to myself. Like, I don't know how I justified doing stuff like that, but I did. I managed. I found a way. Um, and then I got this job where I had to work from home, and that really opened up a lot of drinking and using time for me. It meant that, my sort of first week I'd get away with like the excitement of a new job was enough to kind of get me through the days. And then eventually I realized that I had this whole day on my own with nobody really there. All I had to do was sort of move my cursor on my laptop to make it look like I was still online and doing some work. And I started just drinking all the time, to the point where it wasn't really doing enough for me anymore, but I was still doing it. And I'd wake up every morning with that same dread, that same knot in my stomach. Um, and I would just say to myself, I'm just going to have like one drink at the moment, see if it will take the edge off of it, and then we will stop. And it was always like this we, it was never just me, it was like me and my accomplice. And we'll stop after that. And that was never the case. And I didn't really understand why once I started I couldn't stop. Um, it just happened every single day, and I believed every single day that it would be different. Um, and it went on like that for a few years, and things started to get um, difficult. The consequences were coming in that I wasn't able to work. I was keeping my family at arm's length so they couldn't see how bad I'd gotten. Um, and I was living with a boy at the time who became my husband and now has become my ex-husband. And I was trying to hide it from him, and I would hide the fact that I was sort of drinking and then using sort of painkillers that I didn't need, and all this stuff. I was just really trying to hide it. So I was always on the sly. I was always on a mission, and I was just living this really dishonest life. And there's only so long that you can kind of keep that up for, I reckon, before you get caught. And he started to find bottles hidden around the house in obscure places, and it was starting to come to light a little bit. Um, and he had said to me, like, along with my mum, and never my dad, but always my mum and my partner had always said, like, you maybe need to have a look at this, like, it's starting to impact you. And I kind of thought, yeah, maybe, but I sort of did it just to pay lip service or to get them off my back. And I tried a few various things. Like I said, I've gone to my GP, and they always just kind of threw more pills at me. I went to a drug and alcohol agency where they suggested that I keep a diary of what I've been drinking and using, on which I would just lie. Um, I went to see a psychiatrist once who told me that if I winked at myself in the morning, that I might get through the day. Um, Hypnotherapy, like this guy's taught me some tapping techniques. So if I tap my collarbone and then my temple, I'll be okay, and I will manage to walk past every pub or pharmacy and I would be fine. And that kind of stuff may work for some, but not somebody like me. It didn't even scratch the surface. So I did all these things and I sort of addressed the problem slightly, but I also got extremely resentful at people for telling me that I had a problem, because I mean, externally I'd managed to keep my shit together for quite a few years. I was always the top student, and I had this degree, and I had an all right job, and I'd married some guy who was pretty decent, and I had a nice house, and none of that really mattered. But to the outside world, I was projecting that I had this all right life. Um, and again, the progression of the illness got me. I started to descend further into it, to the point where I just didn't care if I was going to get caught anymore. I was just done. I was going to live my life the way I wanted to, and apparently that was just drinking and easing myself into oblivion every day. So I did that for a little bit longer until it got far too much for my husband. My behaviours were ridiculous. I don't blame him for chucking me out. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because at the age of 24 now, I had nothing. I'd lost all that external stuff. My husband said, right, that's enough, you're out of here. And I was back home living with my dad and his wife, and they had just downsized because me and my stepbrothers had moved out. We'd grown up and moved out, and so I was in this in his box room, and it still had all this junk in it from them moving in and trying to get themselves organised, and there was no bed, and I was just back home with nothing, no job, no money, no husband, no car, all that external stuff, but also no self-esteem, no self-worth, no desire to keep going, and a real, like, honest confusion as to how that had become my life. So I spent a few months there in my dad's box room, experiencing some really horrendous psychosis. I was really physically ill. I remember my dad shouting at me one morning because I was hearing voices through the pillow, and I was convinced that someone had like hidden something in my room, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And my dad was screaming at me like, you're losing your mind, Caitlin, you are losing your mind. And I was like, well, lock me up then. You know, I was welcoming the idea of just being locked up somewhere, and because I didn't know what was going on. I was waking up every morning feeling awful, and then not wanting to drink or use anything, and then doing it anyway every single day, and I couldn't understand it. It was completely against my will at this point. So that went on for a few months, and eventually I reached a point where I had sort of a moment of clarity or an internal snap, or however you want to call it, and I believe for me it was God-given. And I had this sort of window of opportunity, this window where I could see what my life had become very clearly, and I knew that I was on my way out. I knew that physically I was so ill. I was in and out of hospital. I knew I couldn't really go on like that much longer. I saw that I was dying, and for once, probably in my life, I actually didn't want to. So I called my mum in North Carolina, and I told her, I believe I said, Mum, if I don't go to rehab today, then I'm going to die. And the relief she said that came with that was immense, because she'd been waiting for that call for a few years. And she said, cool, we'll like find somewhere over in the States, I'll fly you over, and we'll sort this out, don't worry about it. And I was like, no, it's okay. I'd already Googled some place in England, and I had kind of booked myself in. And I got on a plane, I think that afternoon, if I remember rightly, and I flew down to England and stayed in a really horrible, like, grimy hotel, and had like one final lane blowout on my own, and it was pathetic. And the next day, I rocked up at this treatment centre, which I was actually quite excited about, but I think that's because my expectation of it was I thought I was going to go into this like really nice establishment that had like a swimming pool, and I'd have like a nice robe and slippers, and people would like stroke my hair and tell me like everything was going to be okay, and I thought they were going to teach me how to drink and use like a lady and send me on my way. And that wasn't my reality. I rocked up to this treatment centre in Luton. It was a small like red brick building, and I was like, what is this? And the entire counselling team at that time were addicts in recovery, who'd been working a 12-step program. So that meant that they could see through my bullshit, which I didn't like, and they told me about myself, and it was terrifying. And they took my solution away, which was horrible, because I started to feel all this stuff, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't identify what my feelings were. My thoughts were just insane, and I actually got worse. Take away my substance, and I got a hell of a lot worse, and my behaviours get worse, and it was quite stressful. And I was a little terror when I was in rehab. I didn't really engage. I didn't behave very well. I broke all the rules because I was like, no one's going to tell me what to do, even though I was there to get well. So what I did for the first couple of months there was I just did what I knew they wanted me to do. So I wrote the papers that they had done. They sort of created these step work papers that we had to complete, and I can write good because I can do that. So I would do that, and I would say all the right things and make all the right noises. And we had to go to 12-step meetings. We had to do 5 a week, and that's where I was introduced to Cocaine Anonymous. And it was cool. I liked the meetings because there were some cool people there, and I got coffee, and I could hang out and have cigarettes and stuff. And that's kind of all I did initially. I didn't really engage with anyone. I didn't really listen out for the solution. I was quite resistant to all that stuff. I sort of didn't really like the idea at 24 years old to be doing meetings 5 times a week and going around in threes and reading from this book. And I just didn't like it. I didn't want that to be my life. So I did that for a couple of months, and then and what they did there as well is they taught me a lot from the big book. They taught me a lot of what I suffered with. They explained to me that what I had was a threefold illness, that I had this physical aspect of it that meant I was different to other people, different to my dad who can go have a couple of drinks, or different to my friends who can have a couple of lines and stop. I'm different to that. Once I start, I can't stop. And I was like, okay, I understand that. And then they told me that I had this obsessive thinking, which I could see, you know. I was like, yeah, I do have that obsession, and I do believe the lie, and that's maybe how I'm ending up here. Yeah, I get that. And then the spiritual malady bit I could identify with completely through my entire life, even before I had found substance. So I was making all this sense of it, and I had some knowledge, and I'd looked a little bit at my truth, but I wasn't fully engaging. And after sort of a couple of months in there, I decided that I didn't really need the steps, I didn't really need the meetings. I might do 1 or 2 now and again, so I left, and I really thought it was going to be okay. And within a few hours, I was drunk and high, and I was banging on the bar, thinking, how on earth have I got here again? Like, really didn't understand, because I thought, well, okay, I know I've got this allergy, so I just won't react to it, which is insane, because you wouldn't do that if you had a nut allergy. You wouldn't just be like, oh, I'll maybe just test out a little bit of peanut butter and see if I get away with it. Like, it's just mental. But anyway, that's it. And I ended up drunk and high again for, I think it was about 6 days, and it was hell. I had heard people say that if you've had a period of sobriety or dry time, picking up again doesn't take you back to when you were like a kid in the park drinking with your friends and getting away with it. It takes you back to where you left off, and worse, and that was my experience. It got really painful really quickly, and I went right back to that place of just wanting to die, not wanting to be here anymore, not wanting to communicate with anyone. And 6 days later, I'm sitting there like in my pants. It was like, how on earth has this happened? And thankfully, the treatment centre manager got in touch with me and said, I hear you're in a kind of spot of bother, would you like to come back? So I did. I went back into treatment, and I started engaging in meetings, and I started actually listening to people who were doing the share, who'd gotten clean time, and I could hear similarities for once. Before that, when I'd gone in, I'd say, well, I've never been to prison, so maybe I don't belong here, or I've never used that substance, so maybe I don't belong here, and that's all that my head would do, is just try and keep me away. And all of a sudden, I've been cracked open to actually hearing that these people are exactly the same as me, and they're working this solution, and they seem to be happy, and I was confused by that, because I was like, these people are straight and they're happy. So I decided to kind of get on board and try and forget everything that I'd ever thought that I knew. And I met this woman, and she had a few years of clean time. I think she was about 6 at the time, and she just had this really calm energy about her, and she was really friendly. She had like a nice external life as well, which was attractive to me. And she was just really lovely. She just seemed really serene, and I wanted a bit of that. So I asked her if she would be my sponsor, which was quite scary. I don't know why. Like, I would never have issues asking for anything before, but when it came to this, it was quite terrifying. But I asked her, and she said yeah, and she said it would be a pleasure to help me through this work. And we started a journey that has been incredible so far. And it was simple. You know, what I did was I went to her house once a week, and we read from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we did it like word for word, line for line, page for page, and when it said take action, we take action. And it was a very loving process, and it wasn't as scary as I had initially thought. Like, that sort of step 1 stuff was really easy for me. I had just lived it, and I had just relived it, and I saw my powerlessness. I saw that it was against my will, and that this combination of the obsession and the allergy was going to make me powerless, and that life is unmanageable. Oh my God, that was an understatement. So that part was easy, and then coming to believe in a power greater than myself, I didn't really struggle with that either. I've been brought up in a really sort of open-minded environment, and my mum was always quite spiritual, and I just didn't really believe, although probably did at one point, believe that I was the biggest thing here. Um, and I was willing to believe. I believed that there was something, and did I have faith that it could get me clean and sober? No, not initially, but I was willing to. Um, and then I made a decision to start like turning all my will and life over to that thing, whatever it was going to be. And it was quite a big decision. Like for me, it was sort of like, yes, I'm going to do this, and yes, I'm going to continue with the rest of the steps. I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to do this. And I'd heard a lot of things around step 4 and how terrifying it was. And it kind of put me off because I just heard all these people being like, "Oh, I hit a 4, and then I drank, and then I used, and it's just really scary." And then my reality of it was not that. It was just I had to take inventory and look at this resentment list, and I'd already lived it all. I just had to sort of write it down. And yeah, it was a bit stingy at points, but there was nothing compared to what it had been. And then I got to share all that stuff, and that was a really freeing experience for me, sharing it with a woman who kind of just nodded along with me as I did it. She didn't think I was a freak. She wasn't shocked by anything that was on there. And it was really, really helpful just to kind of offload that. And I remember going home that night from my sponsor's house after I'd sort of done my 5, and I just felt like this overwhelming sense of okayness. Like it wasn't flashes of light, it wasn't anything that profound. Felt the ease and comfort that I'd always needed. Like, I think I'm going to be okay. I've got a chance here. And then I sat in quiet time and I sort of reflected and have I done everything that I need to do here, and sat in that. And then I was faced with this list of character defects that I have, which is huge. And I had to sort of be willing to have all that stuff removed. And it would be nice, this is not my experience, it may be for some, if they just kind of, okay, I'm ready for that one to go, can you take it now? Not how it's worked for me. It's something that I still very much have to work on a couple of years in. But it's quite nice. I'm getting to know myself through that process. And then I sort of just live in what we call the growth or the maintenance steps. And I've loved that actually, because it's just become part of my working day now. The inventory stuff I do still, I review my day, if I catch myself doing something that's off key, I admit it, not always promptly, but I definitely get there, and I have a chance to put all that right, and I sort of really enjoyed my the 11 stuff, like that conscious contact with God, and that was a word I was a little bit not scared of. Like I said, I wasn't scared of it, but it was just something that was a bit nothing to me, and that's become sort of one of the most important thing is my relationship with my higher power, with God. And I'm not a religious person. I wasn't brought up religiously, and that is now something that I'm exploring. But the beautiful thing about that in our program is that it can just be anything. It can be the God of your understanding, and it's a very personal affair for me. And it's just, yeah, whatever you want it to be. So that was helpful to start with. And I do my best now to sort of carry a message and where I can, and that's not just in the rooms, but in the community if I can. I sponsor other women. I'm of service today in the fellowship, and it just lights me up still. I absolutely love being of service. It was a chore for me to start off with, and I had to kind of be persuaded to go down that, and now I love doing it. It's such a great fellowship to be part of. And as a result of doing all that stuff and continuing to do that stuff, and I really do feel like a baby. I've only been around for a couple of years, but I've managed to stay clean and sober for a couple of years, and that's a miracle, because I really couldn't get a couple of hours before. And my life has completely changed. My relationships have come to light. They've just blossomed. Like my mum and I are extremely close, even though she's over in North Carolina and I'm over here. We Skype all the time and share our experience of God that day, and it's really beautiful. My dad has recovered. He doesn't have sleepless nights anymore. I have really good friends here. I've made some really good friends in the fellowship. I didn't come here to make friends, but it's happened as a result. I have a nice home. I have great friends. I put my head on the pillow at night, and I don't have that like mental head anymore. It's just quite quiet. Sometimes it's not, but mostly it's pretty peaceful up there. And life is simple. I keep it really simple and it's beautiful. Like materialistically, probably I don't have as much as I have done before in the past, but it's all worth having. It's all earned, and it's all sort of mine, and it's all got the CA stamp on it. It's all part of. It's all as a result of doing this, and I know that I'm only one drink or drug away from never being clean and sober again in my life. I know that I have to do this on a daily basis. Um, it's kind of the only thing I know is that if I sit in discomfort for long enough, then I'm going to do the only thing I know how to do, and that's drink and use. So I make a choice today when I get up in the morning to sort of do this stuff to the best of my ability, to work or program where I can, and to help others, to be of service to my fellow humans and not just to fellow addicts. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's on offer to everyone. When I first came in, I saw the big guns who had multiple years, and I was just like, oh, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to get that. And the only reason they had it was because they had done this stuff and they kept doing it. There was nothing else. It's a very simple formula, and and the amount that I do today, like compared to how catastrophic my problem was, doesn't quite add up. It doesn't feel like I'm doing that much. It's not a chore. It's just part of my life now. And it's the greatest thing I've ever done for myself and for those around me. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And thank you for letting me share.